Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
Can you believe it's August already?
I can.
Oh, no,
it
actually,
happens.
We're recording this
We're
in July.
It's all a lie.
My July was great. How was yours?
My July was amazing, especially that part where you had to put on a conference about ketogenic diet for a week, and I was touring in Germany for the Modern Web Tour with Telerik.
Was that awesome?
That was
or
a
what?
great part.
Oh, well, somebody tell me about it.
Yeah.
I have something a little different for Better Know Framework today, and I wonder if
Awesome.
you guys have heard about it.
Hit me.
Roll the music.
All right, dude, what do you got?
This is LimeBike. If you go to limebike.com, it's basically a shareable electric scooter that is locked, and you unlock it with an app.
Cool.
And you lock it with an app. So you basically rent it with an app. You go over to it, you unlock it with the app, you electric scoot to wherever you're going, and then you lock it back up again. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, this has become a thing in San Francisco. There's like a half a dozen different electric scooter companies out there now. It's hard to get around in that city.
I believe I heard a story that Google has invested a few $1 million into this company. So they kind of like it. And by a few, I think it's 300 million. That's what I heard.
$1 million here, $1 million there.
Pretty soon, it's real money.
Yeah.
But anyway, watch the video. It's a really cool idea, and these things are so light and so portable. That's it. That's what I got.
Yeah, no, there's a real flat-out scooter war going on out there, and the Lime guys are one of them.
Yep.
Awesome.
So who's talking to us today, Richard?
I grabbed a comment off of show 1540, which we did in April of 2018 with Frank Kruger talking about We.
Yeah.
You know, I know we're gonna have some conversations about building, mobile apps and UIs and various experiences. They're all challenging, no two ways about it.
Mm-hmm.
And We was a really cool conversation because Frank's amazing, and just thinking about more and better ways to make a UI and better tooling. This comment comes from Larry Lustig, who says Frank Kruger is even crazier than his brother Freddie Kruger, really. Oh, man. But at least in a good way crazy. Writing an object-oriented generator for .NET to HTML is a great idea. I'm going to guess that a lot of us have set foot on this path at one time or another before deciding it didn't provide enough leverage over HTML templates to make it worthwhile. The secret sauce in We is the automatic synchronization between the .NET object model and the DOM, eliminating the need to write any rendering code.
Yeah.
But for all of its idiosyncrasies, the HTML DOM is still a familiar object model. Where I spend a lot of my time and generate enormous frustration is on the CSS, which doesn't behave like an object model at all. I'm frustrated with CSS. How could that be? How does that happen? That's the strangest thing.
CSS is called writing outside the box.
It would be great to see an object-oriented approach to styling using .NET styling classes, which could be bound to elements in a structural object model to emit somehow CSS that would behave as a programmer might expect it to. XAML to CSS, anyone? That doesn't sound hard at all. What could go wrong? I have no idea how this might be accomplished, but I bet Frank does. Frank's pretty smart, man. He might just have a way to solve that problem. He's certainly thinking about it. So, Larry, thank you so much for your comment. A copy of Music to Go By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Go By, write a comment on the website at botnetrocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Google Plus and Facebook. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
Absolutely. And definitely follow us on Twitter. He's at Rich Campbell. I'm at Carl Franklin. Send us a tweet.
Oh, I get it. Get to do it with a French accent, though.
I don't know. It's hard to do that with a French accent. Kind of sound like a siren.
Yeah.
Speaking of Larry Lustig, he was at Keto Fest. One of my peeps
he really?
From New York City. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Good guy. All right, let's bring on our guest today. Matt Netkow has been a software developer, consultant, and teacher for over 10 years While initially focused on back-end .NET application development, a few years ago he started paying attention to an increasingly popular language called JavaScript. Maybe you've heard of it. He quickly fell in love with building PhoneGap mobile apps and has been involved with front-end technologies ever since. Recently, he joined Ionic as a product evangelist to help spread the word about cross-platform, web-based mobile apps. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here, guys.
Welcome, Matt. See what I did there?
Nice. This is going to be all Matt jokes now.
You're a longtime fan of the show, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Awesome.
I've seen you guys live too. I think my favorite moment was maybe around 2012 at that conference. You guys had a great talk on bourbon or whiskey or one of the nerd out, geek out shows. So been a fan ever since.
Yeah, and that was just dinner.
We recorded the Whiskey Geek Out in Montreal, I'm pretty sure.
That's right, we did. Yeah.
That conference show that we did a Geek Out at was for 900, and it was the automated driving show.
Yeah, and you talked about Uber for the first time.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome that the things are coming around. Like, people who've been listening to our show for all these years are now becoming guests. And I think that's so cool.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I certainly agree.
Yeah. We did our first show on PhoneGap in 2010 when it was still PhoneGap, before Adobe got it.
Uh-huh.
And it was, the idea that it was going to fill the gap until HTML5 sort of took over. And yet it's never gone away.
Yeah.
That's true. And that's what I'm excited to talk about today, kind of the evolution of PhoneGap, hybrid apps, what that whole space looks like today.
Tell us.
Yeah. So why is PhoneGap still being used? What's the gap it's still filling that HTML couldn't do on its own?
Sure. That's a great starting point. So to kind of back it up a little bit, PhoneGap falls under what we call a hybrid app and mobile app development approach. And the idea behind that is kind of like, as developers, as we all know, whether you're thinking of Java from back in the day or all different types of languages, there's so many of us out there that are obsessed with the write once, run everywhere mantra and are always pursuing those kind of solutions, right? And this is certainly no different and kind of came up for the mobile space initially, and it's expanded into the desktop and mobile browsers and things like that. Yeah. So to kind of highlight, the hybrid approach involves, at the end of the day, creating a native mobile app like you're used to. But instead of using native technologies like Objective-C or Swift for iOS or Java for Android, you're using web technologies, HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. And so you mentioned PhoneGap and kind of what that looks like. So PhoneGap acts as the technology that allows these type of apps to be compiled and bundled into native apps that your end user downloads. And really, it's leveraging a little bit of native code and a little bit of JavaScript behind the scenes to take your developers' web assets and images and things and bundling that into a native app shell so that, again, for the end user, it still looks like a native app, but you're able to code it up in web technologies.
Now, if I remember correctly, one of the other advantages of the PhoneGap approach is because it was technically still just kind of running in a browser, you got to use all that tech, but it wasn't actually connected to the internet that way. So you also had access to the device. You got access to its camera and GPS and all that sort of stuff back when there were no standards in HTML for any of that. Is that still true?
Correct. And it's still a primary use case for today. So that was really the powerful, exciting part of PhoneGap and that kind of technology was being able to access native device APIs like any other kind of app. Now, how that really works at a quick high level is you still have to write the native code per platform in its native language. And those are bundled up as plugins, much like you'd expect them in any other type of framework. But what's really neat is they're published as a single, for the end user developers, we'll call them, they're published and available as exposed as JavaScript APIs. So I love the camera example, right? So if you want to say from your JavaScript code, take a picture, there's a get camera method that you write that one line one time, and the plugin, basically, we don't have to worry about how that works. The plugin will open up the camera and give you, the end user would take a picture, let's say, and then you're pass back that image data and can work with it in JavaScript. And you have that kind of standard uniform API and don't have to worry about, oh, is this Android? Is this Windows Phone, iOS, all that? It's just one standard mechanism, and all those kind of details are hidden from you as a web developer.
Now, when Adobe acquires PhoneGap, they also release a thing called Cordova. Is there still both? Are they different?
Yes, that's a great question, and often can be kind of confusing. So it actually, the timelines I'm not 100% on, but basically as it stands now, Cordova is they're both open source, but Cordova is the Apache's open source version, and PhoneGap is basically Adobe's extra implementations, plugins, third-party tools built on top of Cordova. To most of us, it's basically the same, but Adobe has a couple of monthly subscription tools like PhoneGap Build that are built into their monthly cloud subscription. You know, the same thing that you'd buy and get access to Photoshop and things like that. They have some additional tools. So basically, at the end of the day, very similar. You might see them used interchangeably online and in different articles and things.
Okay, and the same plugin that I can make for PhoneGap but works in Cordova?
Yes. Yep. Because at the end of the day, it's you have your separation of your native code, implementing whatever platform-specific functionality you want, and then a JavaScript and API that you interact with.
Yeah.
The other thing that I remember about Cordova/PhoneGap was that it had a much longer tail. It wasn't just iOS, Android. There was all kinds of devices that it supported.
Yep, that's right. So going back a few years, you had BlackBerry, Windows Phone, and then I think even Firefox OS, other types of platforms. Yep. Mm-hmm. And the idea there is, again, be able to have one set of application code that you're able to repurpose for different platforms.
Sure.
Which they're certainly, and we can kind of talk about, this hybrid approach versus native, and kind of go into that next. Basically, as you can imagine, the benefits there that I've always been a fan of is you have so many web developers nowadays and folks that are, as they're getting into programming, learn JavaScript and HTML and the web tech. It's a good like introduction to programming and everything, right? So you have one benefit is skill reuse there. If you have a web team that's building out your desktop website, having to go and find and skill up different mobile developers can be expensive. And you might have, so the kind of one of the benefits there in the original thoughts was, reuse their skills, have them apply that to different domains and keep costs down, right? You have definitely lots of challenges. We'll talk about that, but that's kind of one idea. Another idea behind it is prototyping, right? So if you have folks that can, you made some great jokes about CSS. I myself am just absolutely awful at it, and probably always will be.
Bootstrap, baby.
Yep, exactly. Yes, you have frameworks like Bootstrap and things that can help get some ideas out the door, and don't have to rely on setting up Xcode and all the different iOS and Android tools and things like that. Now, of course, with performance-wise, it's not necessarily as good as native. Really, how this works is when your hybrid app is packaged into a native app shell. One of you mentioned your code is still executing in an embedded browser that is called a web view.
Yeah,
and so you're the one drawback kind of dimension is you're adding multiple layers onto the build process, right? You have the bare metal code that's executed up through this web code. And yes, realistically, you're adding on to another layer there. But what's really, I'll kind of get into this more as we talk about more of the progressive web and more HTML5 standards. A few years back, when I started building PhoneGap apps and started getting into JavaScript around 2010 to 2012 or so. HTML5, it realistically wasn't there, performance-wise and feature-wise. That's why we needed those plugins, and still a little bit to this day we do too. In fact, you may recall 2012 was a big moment for Facebook. They had attempted to write, I believe, their mobile apps in HTML5, and Zuckerberg famously came back and said, "Oh, this is not right for us. The web is not there." Now, of course, they have, compared to a lot of the rest of us, massive scaling issues and a lot of things to, kind of concerned about having billion plus users. We'd all love to have that many, for whatever business you're on.
They have good problems.
Exactly. So I totally get that. For them at that point, it made sense, so they switched over to native.
There was some criticism that they were just doing HTML5 badly, as I recall at the time. But it was. I do remember it being kind of a seminal moment. But that had more to do with the conversation about how to utilize mobile devices too, because Moore's law is still being applied to the mobile hardware steadily. It's getting faster, has more memory. Like we're not needing to wring every ounce of performance out of a phone every time anymore.
Exactly. And that's really my next thought to share is, interestingly, that the very next year, 2013, for the web really changed things. You kind of hinted at it there, Richard. The iPhone 5 was released, and other types of better Android-related hardware as well. And what does that lead to? That led to, what are we up to now? 2 to 4 gigabytes of RAM in phones.
Yeah.
Improved from the browser front, both on desktop and mobile. All the providers and web browser makers started improving their JavaScript engines and their runtimes. So, and just better CPUs and just better hardware in general started around 2013. So that's really, we kind of consider that an inflection point where the scale kind of tipped over towards the web. And of course, just 1 year later is when the Facebook thing happened. But, it's really, things have come a long way. We have so much that has evolved from that, and we'll kind of get into that next. So there's been a rise of frameworks and sort of the pendulum swinging back towards an embracing of web technology. We just mentioned at Facebook, well, again, a few years ago, they publicly gave up on the web, it seemed, at least for mobile and everything.
Right.
Well, what do we have the past couple of years that has gained a lot of popularity? React and React Native, built by Facebook. Yeah. So I just have to chuckle at that because, they had made such a big stink about it. And then here, the table, they're coming back to it.
Well, if anybody can build a web app at scale, it's them. You know? They have to. Otherwise, everybody goes away.
Yeah, they've certainly got experience around all of that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It just seems that the web technologies have gotten so much more mature now that the major browsers are playing nice with each other, which wasn't always the case.
That's very true. One particular challenge was Android with different types of, we still have this today, fragmentation, different manufacturers building different types of phones and supporting different versions of Chromium, the Google Chrome web engine, right? But a lot of that has kind of standardized. I as of, I think it was Android 4.4, so quite a handful of versions ago, Android broke out the web browser into its separate kind of app that can be updated by users. So you don't even need to necessarily upgrade your whole operating system. As we know on mobile, can be a challenge if users aren't updating their web browsers and really the whole OS. But now it's an entirely separate app that can be, oftentimes, I think more and more we're seeing on especially iOS devices, apps and the OS themselves, we're seeing automatic updates take hold on, in the background for users. So you don't have to think about it, right? And the best part for web tech is you're always using the latest and greatest. So you get those new features. Your hybrid hybrid mobile apps and things get faster over time just because of that better hardware, and just because the Safari and Google Chrome and all those browsers are being updated automatically.
Mm.
And Matt, give us one moment here for this very important message.
Save the date for .NET Conf 2018, September 12th through 14th. .NET Conf is a free 3-day virtual developer event co-organized by the .NET community and Microsoft. Over the course of 3 days, you can enjoy a wide selection of live sessions that feature speakers from the community and .NET product teams. These are the experts in their field, and .NET Conf is a chance to learn, ask questions live, and get inspired for your next software project. You will learn to build for web, mobile, cloud, desktop, games, services, libraries, and more for a variety of platforms and devices, all with .NET. There are sessions for everyone, no matter if you are starting out or a seasoned engineer. Expect presentations on .NET Core and ASP.NET Core, C#, F#, Azure, Visual Studio, Xamarin, and much more. Head to www.dotnetconf.net. That's .netconf.net to learn more and tune in.
And we're back. Richard Campbell, Carl Franklin, it's .NET Rocks. We're talking to Matt Netkow about the PhoneGap / Cordova. And you're also an Ionic guy, right?
Literally
sure
now.
Literally, yes. Yeah. Kind of wanted to segue into talking about some of the frameworks that are available in the cross-platform and hybrid space, including, of course, Ionic. Let's go back really quick to some of the other ones, though, and get back to Ionic, of course.
Sure.
So again, React Native, definitely, interesting use case by Facebook there. The React framework is all web-based, and then React Native is their separate but related, of course, as we can tell by the name, related implementation that takes your web code and actually builds native apps, so iOS and Android apps. What's interesting there is they're actually creating, they're not embedding the JavaScript like we do with Ionic and the web assets. They're actually transforming that into native code based on your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Kind of an interesting approach, but it's a little limited. They're really just targeting iOS and Android, not the plethora of platforms there. And they can certainly work for you. And kind of along the same lines, Flutter from Google. It's brand new, really brand new. And that's written and with that one you use Dart, the Dart programming language. Yeah. And kind of a similar outcome as React Native. It ends up spitting out native versions of your mobile apps for iOS and Android. And then, of course, as this is .NET Rocks, you have Xamarin, which is now a Microsoft property. I'm sure we've had a lot of guests on that. And that's definitely definitely an attractive option for .NET developers, C# devs, because you're writing C# code that gets transformed into native apps. So I do like that option. And I have, coming from a .NET background myself, I have played around with that a lot. What's interesting with it is you're adding yet another layer onto the mobile app stack here of when these apps get translated, and different. They have their own kind of templating language in the way that you write the script tags, the HTML, components that get created. So that can be kind of a little bit of a learning curve there, but definitely an option for .NET devs getting started. And lastly is Telerex NativeScript, which is written very much like Ionic in web technology with TypeScript and similar languages. But they have their own, also have their own set of syntax and layout and kind of language that you have to learn there.
Yeah, and then of course it's Ionic. There's just a lot of different tools here. To me, as a longtime observer of the industry, I go down, and I appreciate you going down that pretty comprehensive list. Right, we're all feeling around for the right way to do something. Absolutely, and that's why as you kind of mentioned, I joined Ionic just about 2 weeks ago. I've been a longtime fan, and I'm just absolutely a true believer and have been following them for a number of years. Of course,
I'm totally biased now, but what
It's your job.
They're exactly
Right.
So, yeah, and so their approach is, of course, totally biased, but leveraging, I think, the best of both worlds. You have, you're still using web technologies, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but able to use that singular code base to go truly cross-platform without any compromises. So we have, of course, mobile apps, iOS and Android, and then desktop apps with Electron, kind of coupled together there, another open source library. As many will probably know, possibly know, Visual Studio Code, Slack, I think maybe Skype, other kind of chat tools are built on Electron and this kind of approach. So it's gaining tons of momentum. And again, for the average end user, you're not going to necessarily know that it's an Electron app, an Ionic app, all that kind of thing.
It's just, it sort of hides that whole aspect of it. What you programmed in was almost secondary to the point.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's really exciting about this, I think, is we're seeing, and we'll continue to see in the future, a convergence on this technology and a maturity of JavaScript and the platforms behind it, which is why I'm so excited to be joining them. Regardless of whatever tool or framework you pick, it's just an exciting time, I think, to be a developer and be thinking about building cross-platform apps,
right?
Because we're getting more and more to a point where it doesn't matter what technology you pick. It's opening up so many different worlds and possibilities that would typically take you, whether you're part of a team or trying to launch a startup as a solo dev or all those kind of different use cases, so much on the front end aspect of like we're talking about here has sped up completely. And the amount of power that you have as an individual or a small team or an enterprise is just astronomical. You couple that with all of our cloud backends and how amazing those have also been built up. And you've got everything you need to really create some pretty amazing apps, right?
Yeah. Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
Yeah, it's time to dissect the meaning of the word progressive, which is actually made up of 3 separate words. You got prog, that means gorilla-like.
Okay.
Res, which means insanely powerful, and iv, which is the sound your thumb makes when you hit it with a hammer. It's actually, I don't even know what that means. It's
That's
actually
pretty funny, actually. That's what I think.
It's actually
insanely
time to give
powerful, and you'll hit yourself with a hammer.
All right. Can I finish?
Yes.
It's actually time to give away a $200 Amazon gift card to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club, compliments of Progress Telerik. But first, let me tell you about Conversational UI from Progress Telerik and Kendo UI. Conversational UI are chatbot framework agnostic user interface controls and components that enable .NET and JavaScript developers to create modern conversational chatbot experiences in their web, mobile, and desktop applications. The industry's first packaged set of user interface components built specifically for chatbots is available as part of the company's Telerik ASP.NET Ajax, ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Core, WinForms, WPF, and Xamarin products, as well as Kendo UI for jQuery, Angular, Vue, React, PHP, and JSP libraries. By implementing key UI design features such as calendars, date pickers, list views, and others that are included in the toolsets, developers will be able to improve chatbot conversation through visual elements that enhance the natural flow of conversation. For more information, visit telerik.com/conversational-UI.
All right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner is Grant Clark.
Congratulations, Grant.
Yeah.
Golf
Congrats,
cap
Grant.
for you.
And Grant just won a $200 Amazon gift card. Compliments of Progress Telerik. Just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you'd like to be a member, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world. In every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of said fan club. But you got to sign up to win. All right, and it's your turn, Matt. If you had $5,000 to spend on technology today, what would you buy?
That's a great question. So I just moved to the Madison, Wisconsin area, and as everyone probably knows, we're surrounded by a bunch of lakes.
Yeah.
And for me, I've always, and it's summertime, so I'm, been out there and fishing and everything. And
they're not lakes, they're mosquito factories.
Yeah, that's been a little tough to get that and the humidity. Coming from Seattle, so getting used to that has been has been a challenge. Not gonna lie, definitely. Yep. But yeah, so I'm excited to be out on the water again and everything. And I've always wanted to have a jet ski, Wave Runner, Kawasaki kind of on jet ski, and to kind of cheat a little bit. I don't have a particular model on that, but there's something I did find that I think is just so funny that I've been thinking about my commute into work and everything. And I found this thing called a bi-ski, which is a scooter jet ski hybrid. And it pretty much looks like you'd expect. It's like a motorcycle kind of design that goes on land. And then you can just drive that sucker right into water and scoot across. So
can you unlock it with your phone? Because that would be cool.
Probably, and with a hybrid app as well.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the bi-ski, and it looks like a jet ski and a motorcycle had a nasty encounter. But but I've seen scooters uglier than this thing. So
yeah. Lime green scooters are pretty ugly, actually.
So I think you're going to blow your budget, mind you. Because good jet skis are 10 grand.
I know. So I'm thinking I'm starting with like a used Wave Runner and then building up to that. How's that?
Right.
All right. Good enough.
Wow, this thing looks cool. I might have to have one, living by the water and all.
Yeah, see, I thought you guys would go for it. I mean, again, I'm aware of your Geek Out sessions, and
yeah.
I mean, that's fabulous. Why not? Yeah.
So are progressive web apps the new spa?
Yes, good transition there. So these are just.
We're working. We're working again, are we?
You don't get anything past me.
Yes, progressive web apps are absolutely the next game changer in web and mobile and beyond. I'm extremely excited about them. And naturally, Ionic supports them now out of the box, and will continue to do so for a long time.
Yeah.
So you don't see progressive web apps as a replacement for all these other libraries? Is this the thing that finally puts PhoneGap to bed kind of thing? If the browser can finally do it all?
It is. Eventually, that is the idea. Yes. And, actually, PhoneGap originally, the whole mantra was from the get-go, they've always wanted to cease to exist someday. Right, that was, which is nice. They've always been very vocal about saying we want to keep pushing browser makers forward and get these features onto the web. But in the meantime, here's that native bridge code and framework that you can use, right?
Yeah.
So progressive web apps, it is a little bit of a buzzword marketing term for sure. But really at the end of the day, it's a browser's ability to provide modern web capabilities and experiences that deliver app-like experiences that we're used to with native apps and desktop apps, things like that. So those are types of things include more support for working offline and having your users perform actions offline and then have those automatically get resynced to a cloud backend when they get a signal or when they get cell service again. Things like caching support, both for deploying updates to them from a web server or other different types of services I'm going to mention here that Ionic provides. Push notifications. A lot of us have probably seen those, much to our unfortunate annoyance with maybe news websites and things. When they ask if you want to receive news throughout the day, those are a PWA feature. getting little notifications in the browser.
Yeah.
Well, it's just a way to have 20 copies of Chrome running at once, consuming resources.
Yep. Well, so like any technology, there's best practices around it too, right?
Right.
And probably the most interesting feature that goes back to what I said about app-like experiences is the ability to pin your web app to the home screen on a mobile device like an app.
Yeah, it's just an icon that happens to go to an app.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And again, that kind of talks to that convergence of, for a non-technical end user, they don't really care what it's built in. They just want to access their info. They want to get work done. They want to stay connected to others. So it's quite an interesting evolution there. But as you can imagine, that's probably the most exciting, because you can do different things like prompt a user to install that to the screen and have that as, it's like an advanced shortcut or a favorite, a bookmark, right? So conceptually it's pretty straightforward to understand. And then the other really last part of that, and that's the part that eventually could, and for some use cases already does, replace PhoneGap and those type of technologies, is different device integration HTML5 APIs. So there's a bunch of them that are available right now. Those that work with that provide the camera and microphone.
Right.
So you can take pictures even today with that without needing native plugins. Support for payments from Apple Pay and all the different providers. I mean, as they kind of like web frameworks changing, you're going to have different payment systems, PayPal over time, that will be supported. And then things like device motion, geolocation, file storage, better offline storage of things, Bluetooth. Most of that is available today and can be taken advantage of. So just, absolutely exciting. And what I'm really excited about for Ionic is, as I mentioned, we support this right now. And we have the next version of our framework, we call it V4, is coming into beta very soon, perhaps even by the time this airs. And that has support for PWAs right out of the box. And perhaps most exciting is, traditionally, with other versions of the Ionic framework, we're really built on top of Angular. And what Ionic provides primarily is different mobile UI components. So your buttons, mobile drawers, all those types of things that can help you build mobile apps and now desktop apps and everything. Those components work very well. They're very performant, but we were tying to building on top of Angular. But with the next version of our framework, we've redesigned everything from the ground up to be built on web components, which is another sort of in the progressive web app space of modern web capabilities. Basically, those allow you to create your own HTML components, as the word says, script tags that can be used anywhere, right? And truly get that cross-platform experience. What that allows us to do then is to start supporting all of the other JavaScript frameworks with our UI controls out of the box. So Angular, and that'll be a huge focus for us still going forward. But now that opens us up to what we were kind of missing before, which is whatever JavaScript framework is in vogue at the moment, perhaps React, Vue, whatever else has come out since this podcast has been recorded, right?
Yeah.
We can support all of that right away. So it's we're very excited for that to drop, and will still allow you to use all of basically, again, so you have that convergence for end users of getting different features and across platforms and moving between different devices. But now for developers, you also don't have to compromise on what framework you want to use.
Right.
And again, a lot of those other realistically, yes, I'm biased, but our competitors are focused on more of the direct native, and iOS and Android specifically.
Sure.
But we've kind of been just getting to this great spot where we can compete on all different types of platforms, desktop, mobile, and browsers and things like that.
And all of these platforms are totally on board. Like there is no complaining from Apple or, I mean, is Safari going to be the engine on an iPhone that runs progressive web apps?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've admittedly over the past few years, Apple's definitely been a little slower to adapt and update Safari to support the HTML5 features that we really need for the best experience. Android's typically been, a handful of steps ahead, but they
Chrome, you mean?
Excuse me, Chrome. And it comes from a place I kind of understand. It's competition of they want to direct users to the App Store where they can collect payments, get their 30%, all that kind of thing. But the reality is that's going to change.
And Android is the number one platform, right? So they really are. If Android goes in this direction, they maybe for the first time they have to follow someone's lead.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's really speaks to the power of what this is going to lead to. Is there's so much friction these days, and you don't really see people wanting to fill up their phone with native apps. You have to go to whatever app store, maybe scan a QR code or something. But I think I remember seeing somewhere that most users across the world only install 1 to 2 apps a month, if that. It's probably less. Yeah. So just imagine being able to provide a simple web link that can then be quickly downloaded, a lot smaller size to download, works offline, can be updated seamlessly, and provides a better user experience. I mean, that's my dream for sure.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, Safari appears to be supporting this stuff, but they have definitely been dragging their feet. I've been saying for a while now that Safari has become the new IE6. In the sense that it is popular because it's the default browser on the iPad, and it is not compliant with standards
currently.
So that developers have to code around Safari, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point. I mean, to be fair, it's still something to think about if you're thinking about hybrid versus native functionality.
Sure.
There is a little bit of lag time there, but from what I've seen, honestly, from building my own apps and working with other companies, most of them are CRUD based. We're talking about line of business apps or needing to show and retrieve data for users and interact with it. So do you need the latest augmented reality, something machine learning, blah, 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 in your app? Maybe. Or if you're building a video game, then that's more of a native use case for sure. But, I don't know what the percentages are there, but let's call it 80-20 of 80% where hybrid or really the progressive web app movement is going to be a perfect use case for.
And I do agree with you that it seems to me like PWAs are the way of the enterprise dev in the future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely agree.
I don't know how popular they're going to be in app stores or, for regular consumer apps, that kind of thing. But when you talk about a long life, known set of support, easy to maintain, easy to keep up to date mechanism, it's very hard to argue with PWA.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we're at Ionic, we're building out a whole platform of tools that surround and support PWAs and desktop and mobile apps that we're just putting a lot of focus into now and are incredibly excited about. Things like our package and deploy feature that lets you that add a lot of like CI/CD automation to builds and creating these, which is important. Reality is we're going to have users consuming native mobile apps and that app store kind of experience for a long time to come. And we provide support for those types of builds, along with what I think is the coolest part of it right now is we have the ability to deploy your web assets, so images and then JavaScript, CSS, and things like that, deploy updates to those without going through the App Store, bypassing the App Store, which is perfectly allowed by Apple.
I have a question for you, and that is, getting back to Ionic a little bit. It seems to me that when tools come out, sometimes there's overlap between maybe bindings in Angular or another framework. And so the developer ends up with more choices about, which stack to use for a particular feature. Is there any overlap that you can point to in Ionic or even maybe in PWA for that matter?
In terms of
just a functionality overlap, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you'll be using two libraries, like I'm using Bootstrap and Knockout currently, and both have bindings for different features, things that you can do in the browser. So you have to sort of decide which stack you're going to use for that feature.
Totally makes sense. Yeah. That's actually a great question. We're with the next version of the framework, at least on the Angular side of things. So traditionally, Ionic's used some concepts like that. They've kind of rolled their own, whether it's maybe navigating between screens, or different like CLI tools that they built out. But we're actually moving towards embracing, for whatever framework it is. I mean, again, primarily right now, Angular is our bread and butter, but so I can mostly speak about that. But we're definitely getting towards more of a stance of embracing the community tools and the framework tools that we work alongside with as the first and primary way to go.
Yeah.
So, for example, we're using, we still have our own CLI that does a lot of different platform services and cloud services, which is really cool. But we're also leaning towards and leveraging like the Ionic CLI more, so that you don't have to try to limit that confusion as much as possible. And same with bindings and different framework features.
Right.
The idea more and more for us is to definitely stay out of your way and avoid that confusion as a dev.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I know what you're talking about. It can be a lot when you go down this approach, there's a lot to get up to speed on and wrap your head around. And the more we stay out of your way in that regard, the better.
Well, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's good to know.
So when you're running inside of this sort of PhoneGap hybrid container, do you still have access to all of the PWA features, the service workers, that kind of thing? Is that available from within that container?
Well, they're really the progressive web app portion is just for the mobile browsers, like running in a web browser, not as much coupled in the native app. If you're talking about the more PhoneGap kind of approach where you have the Android or iOS native app behind it, you're likely still using those plugins.
Right.
The one thing we do have though is our we do kind of have our own Ionic native plugins that we have built on top of some of the existing open source ones that kind of standardize and simplify the API across everything. So again, trying to make it so that you truly do have one code base for everything and don't have to have a bunch of, as you can imagine, if this platform call this slightly reworded camera API, if Android do that, that kind of thing. So where possible, we do that and handle that, I think, quite well.
Because I'm just going to get my head around this, because I've always thought of Ionic as great tooling around building a native app, right? That you compile your stuff into that form. So, but you're supporting PWA. I'm trying to figure out how that works, because that seems counter.
No, I understand. So we have a bunch of templated apps that you can start off with, and we ship. As part of that, we ship and kind of have determined the best practices around the configuration of PWAs and service workers and things like that. So what's kind of great about that is, again, always lots more to learn and get up to speed on. But for getting started and kind of easing you into that, we provide a service worker JavaScript file, some plugin XML files and things like that, that if you want to deploy it to a web server as a PWA, you can do that. And, there's kind of like, we also use, let's say Webpack when we compile the app, right? But to the end user, they don't need to know that. I mean, you can, there's so many configurations and crazy stuff you can do with Webpack. But again, we've taken our knowledge and leadership and applied that into like our tooling so that if you can get into that if you want, but if you just want to deploy and get cracking with caching, push notifications, all that stuff. It's ready out of the box.
So are you actually encouraging people using existing Ionic apps on the mobile to make mobile PWA apps as an alternative using a similar set of tools?
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
That's the idea.
Very cool.
But the plugins aren't going to port across. So depending on where you are in your Ionic app, that might be a non-trivial transformation.
That is true. It really depends on, there's a little bit of an exercise of determining what type of features and plugins you're using on the native side and what you could support on if you went web only. Yeah,
right.
That's definitely true.
But I do think this is, what you're proposing here is this move forward to the sort of plug-in free, we're all, natural web on the mobile device all the way down, which I love. It's just like, that's a big hurdle to jump. It's not that small a transformation yet, but it looks like it's getting there.
It is. Yeah, I won't lie and say it's 100% there and magic and rainbows and everything 100%, but it is getting there. And really there is a discoverability for your end users there too. So I think what we're kind of seeing now is you're going to have that one app and one code base, but deploy it as a PWA, as a web app, and then also to make sure that you don't lose that discoverability aspect from the app stores, compile and build the native app version of your application and put those in the stores as well.
Yeah.
And so I also got to think you got to battle the problem when you get to the PWA of the version of the browser, a given Chrome implementing PWAs is different on Android, iOS, and Windows. And presumably Mac OS and Linux too. Like they're not symmetrical implementations.
That's true. So that's kind of where we do have, some standardization and built into our framework to kind of hide all of those, let's call them issues, with that kind of stuff.
The question is, can you polyfill your way out of this?
Right. And in a lot of cases, I'm not quite an expert yet on that, but in a lot of cases you can, and we do polyfill on that. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
But you imagine the dance here, right? It's one thing to presume implementations for different browsers, another thing to implement for a given browser on multiple platforms. Like that now it's three-dimensional chess.
Yeah.
Yep. Definitely a valid point.
So Matt, what's next on your to-do list?
Well, let's see. So again, we're really looking at getting the beta for our version 4 framework with built on web components and able to support all different types of frameworks like React and Vue and Angular.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of really concentrated on building out some more CI/CD kind of capabilities that will allow you to work with testing with end users, getting out, again, still supporting quite heavily the native approach, because that's definitely, we're not at a point with the PWA across the industry, really, that's going to go away anytime soon. Yeah. And things like that. So lots to come.
That's great. Well, definitely come back and talk to us again when you got something new to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a couple resources to mention for those that are interested and might be new to the cross-platform hybrid approach.
Sure.
I actually have just independently, I about a year ago published a Pluralsight course that is a quick 1 to 2 hour journey through building and publishing a real hybrid app, going from very bare minimum. Doesn't use really any framework. It's mostly HTML, JavaScript, CSS. And that's uses Adobe's PhoneGap build tool, which is kind of a cloud instance that lets you package and transform your web code from a zip file into native apps. So really excited about that. If you're interested, it's a gentle introduction. Because again, when there's a lot to, whether you're picking a framework or evaluating PWAs, it can be very daunting for sure. I know it was for me. So really what I was going for there is just keep it simple. And, if you like that kind of approach, you can kind of see what I've done there and then go and pick, ideally, ideally Ionic, but any of the other frameworks too. And really you're off to the races. And one last little plug, we do have, what I've always been such a fan of Ionic is we're really thought leaders in the space around this, and especially betting everything on the web and open source. So we have a resource center, which we'll put in the show notes, that has all different types of case studies and info about PWAs and web development in general. So I hope everyone will check that out.
Absolutely cool. Hey, thanks a lot, Matt, for spending an hour with us. It was great.
Yeah, thank you both. Really appreciate it.
You bet. And we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC.